this is Venom Geek Media here. I couldn't resist that little gag at the start. I mean, I've been enduring keeping up with the Cardassians memes for, a good few months now, so I thought I'd finally let loose and poke fun at it. And maybe I missed a few opportunities for a few little jabs at that in my episodes. In any case, I hope you guys enjoyed that. I do like a good Cardassian meme. Anyway, that really brings us to today's episode, which is a discussion, a Q&A. You know how these go. I did one for the Romulan Earth War, and I'm doing one for the Cardassian Border War, and I'm just really going to unpack the issues and the themes that are kind of presented, because I think it's been very interesting, and I'll get on to that. First big question that I will address that people have been asking is future. What's next content on this channel? Okay, glad you asked. So I did sort of outline this. So I've got a special planned for Wings of Romulus, where I'm going to be covering the Nova class. I'm talking with artists, but they say it's quite a complicated ship because it's quite smooth and, elegant and all that, and it's a bit more difficult to make. So there doesn't seem to be a 3D model of it out there, or, one that's not widely available, which is why I'm doing this way, because there's just not much in the way of imagery out there of the Nova class. But that is coming up, and I am planning on that. That is an episode I want to do. So that is planned. Some people seem to be concerned that I'm going to run out of content. Don't worry. So, like the Dominion War, I've got a very specific plan for that. So, unlike the Cardassian War and the Romulan War, where I've kind of gone big picture, blow by blow, sort of whole narrative, I don't feel like I need to do that for the Dominion War because it's pretty well documented overall. What I'm going to do with the Dominion War is go for a much more episodic approach, where I'm just going to look in detail at specific battles, and I've got lots of planned. Again, mostly what I want to do is battles that we didn't see, and that goes from the Romulan offensives, hunting the Hutet, the raids on the Tauros shipyards, all of that kind of things, the Battle of Tyra. So that's in the future. More kind of imminent is the next episode I'm going to do is the Battle of Wolf 359, because that uses most of the same ships as in the Cardassian War, so it's quite an easy one, and I think it follows on quite nicely in some respects. So yes, that's what you can expect for the future. Don't worry, I'm not running out of content at all, don't worry about it. That's that, and I suppose I should just get on with talking about the episodes and talking about the themes. So let's start with the first episode. Let's talk about the SETLIKLIL massacre. Getting into this, actually, one thing I will say was my goal, kind of, when I was writing this series, was always, I want this to be controversial. I want people to take issue with character decisions and things like that in the comments, which I'm glad people did, and people to appreciate the kind of the complexity and the difficulty of these issues. With the Romulan Wars, it's pretty black and white, pretty easy, pretty simple in many respects. And then with this one, I was like, there was a couple times where I thought SETLIKLIL Massacre and Starfleet Under Siege, I thought I might get demonetized for this one, or might get limited ads, because it's tackling some pretty tough stuff. In any case, like I say, let's start with the SETLIKLIL Massacre. And kind of the first topic or theme that came up is politics in the military, and the kind of the intertwining of that. And really, that's something that's present in most of my content, certainly all my Wings of Romulus. And it happens, and that part of the reason I talk about it in those is because it's something that happens in the real world, be that through in this instance it was talking about the political limitations in things like the Vietnam War and other things that prevented US generals from securing victory. Now, I don't wholly agree with that view. There is, I think, more to that than just that, but I think that is an issue that came up. If you want a more modern context, you can talk about the political tennis being played with the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter and that sort of falls more into where I discussed that in Wings. But that kind of thing, politics and military, like I say, it's nothing new for my content. But I suppose it's more apparent. And then comes the doctrine of really appeasement and the problems of appeasement, and it's a difficult one. Obviously, the Federation wants peace and really places a high value on peace to, I think, a religious extent, and it's understandable. They've had it pretty good for a long time, basically since the 2290s. They've had basically assured peace, apart from the Termed incident, but for the most part. And a lot of good things have happened in that time. Replicators, medical advances, all of that. They've come a long way, and they've expanded a lot. The Federation expands during peacetime. It doesn't during wartime. No one wants to join a Federation at war. And certainly not if they know it. So, I mean, that comes back to another thing, which is the constant attempt to pretend this isn't a war. And again, I'll get into that with other issues. But so, yeah, the Federation's Vietnam, that was a big comparison. I wouldn't say it necessarily is quite the same. Personally, I would compare it more. I personally compare it more, certainly in the Setlik 3 episode, to Falklands War, just in terms of it's a long way away. It's two actually surprisingly symmetrical forces. And the Falklands War is actually surprisingly symmetrical, and it's almost like World War II style fighting, but in the 1980s. Like they were just off of technological advancements that would have, really changed it into a modern war. The big issue that really comes up with things like appeasement and other such is the Prime Directive, and that's a big issue. And people were like, particularly with Bajor, the occupation of Bajor, and Federation not interfering. Now, in beta canon, in certain books, including books about the early career of Nechayev, the Federation do get involved in Bajor, and I hinted at it. I said, the Enterprise B was rescuing Bajoran refugees, but that's actually getting involved to stop the occupation of Bajor would probably be a step above that, and I think would break the Prime Directive. Now, I might do a whole video where I put the Prime Directive on trial, because it's not without its issues as a rule. That really brings us, actually, talking about beta canon, to the sources, which I want to talk about. So people have asked me, what are my sources? The answer is quite scant. Mostly it is reliant on dialogue. A huge amount is reliant on dialogue. And actually you can garner a lot. So if you the episode where we learn the most about Cardassians in the fewest lines is Chain of Command. Gul Madred basically spills the beans, and that's where I got my inference, because I'm like, okay, well, Gul Madred can remember a time before the military. He's about the same age of Picard. Cardassians are aged like humans, pretty much. So he's about 50, so it can't be that long ago. So there's beta canon at play, but again, beta canon doesn't really cover much. Mostly it's dialogue that I'm pulling from, and it's inference dialogue. So, for example, in a Voyager episode, I think Dark Frontier, Janeway talks to Seven of Nine during a battle with the Cardassians, and they had to rescue someone, or they couldn't rescue someone out in No Man's Land. I don't remember it precisely, but it was a ground battle specifically, and it wasn't Setlik 3. Again, ground battles, I'll get into that issue. And that was kind of Salva, I was thinking, which is a much bigger ground battle. Salva is huge, but it's a shadow of what's to come. But yeah, so for the most part, there's a lot of imagination and headcanon, I will grant you, but I think it's informed enough by beta canon and by dialogue that I think it should be consistent. Now, I did make a few continuity gaffes with the USS Fearless. That's in the next episode. So that brings me to the timeline. And where I say, so people were asking me, and I like to think that it worked out. So weren't the Cardassians spacefaring before all this? You say they only started in the 24th century, late 23rd. So the Cardassians, I think, were spacefaring. That I don't think particularly competently. So we know they were hanging around somewhere in Enterprise, but we won't see them for a long time. I always had, my view is that because of what Golmadred says, the Habitian, or the, whatever you want to call it, the kind of the old order was still going pretty strong by the time of his life, or it was only beginning to die out. And then the Central Command takes over. And of course, the Central Command is, that in itself is a commentary about military and politics, because you essentially have the DTAP Council and the Central Command are fused together in the Union. It's kind of a tied relationship. And with regard to that, that's a commentary really just on, what's your middle classes. Because that's who they are. It's like who your revolutionary is going to be. It's going to be the people who are at least somewhat educated. They'll at least start it because they have the gumption and the know-how. Anyway, so by the 24th century, the Union firmly has control. I don't think it was a big violent revolution. I think it was more just the Union was made as a concession. The Union-style government was made as a concession by whoever the previous rulers were, and just steadily they just got eked out, and the Union became the de facto government. That's my view of the timeline, and that's why I think Cardassia really sort of starts to accelerate in the 24th century, and we'll get more into that in the discussion of other episodes. So then there's the big issue of ground battles. Yeah. Every time I do a ground battle, or mention a ground battle, I always get Arthur Harris's in my comments. If you don't know who Arthur Harris is, here's the meme. Yeah. It's like, no. And I kind of try to make sense of it in the SETLIKLIL Massacre. It's like, well, no, because it's their colony. They're not going to orbitally bombard it, and the Cardassians couldn't because of the shield. And also they wanted to capture. So that's just that. But that's, I like that people, poke fun at it, but it's like still keeps the meme alive, I suppose. That really brings me to something that came up in early comments about the Cardassian border war, and that was the whole thing of war in Star Trek, and wasn't it very much against Gene Roddenberry's vision of the future? And I will say yes. And if you want Gene Roddenberry's vision of the future, you can find it. It's Next Generation Series 1 and 2, and it's quite dull. It's good in some parts, but for the most part, it's really quite dull, and doesn't make for good television or good entertainment. People like stories with conflict, which is sort of incompatible with a completely utopian future. And really, what we see, particularly again with Deep Space Nine, anyone who's watched that, is you start to poke holes in the utopia, because at the end of the day, it's like, okay, it's easy to be a saint in paradise. That's the thing. And also, it's like, war exists in the real world. Part of science fiction and part of storytelling is helping us to deal with those things that happen in the real world. So that's why we have wars in Star Trek, and why I talk about them is because it helps deal with those issues. And actually, people are generally, the big thing with this series, again, because I went out to create some controversy and really get people to air their views, is it helps people, like I say, it helps them to air their views and say their piece on a issue or a topic, and they say it with much more openness and confidence, and kind of are more open about what they think. If you talk about a modern war or even a historical one, their perspectives will be grounded in biases, or they will try to cover their biases or shield them. Whereas again, if you talk about it through the lens of science fiction, people are more willing to talk quite openly about their true feelings about the matter and their perspective. And I think that's much better in terms of addressing those issues. And I don't think for a second that my series is at all pro-war or jingoistic. I think I made it quite clear in the finale that this, it was not good, and it's quite tragic. So that really brings us to now talking about episode 2. This is definitely going to be split into a two-parter as a discussion video, probably, where really we talk about Prime Directive and everything. Episode 2 is, the Battle of MINOS KORVA is very much a kind of just a conventional battle, although it covers the issues of just war, or kind of starts the theme of, the Federation, because the Federation was, Starfleet was prevented from continuing attacks on Cardassian ships, which they were doing very well because of the huge tech gap. But the Cardassians, equally, they made the right decision in terms of forcing them into ground battles, which has kept them in the fight for the next few years. I mean, that's another thing, you're actually talking about timeline. I'm going on so many tangents here. Some people were worried, starting it in 2347, that's quite a long time. It is a long time. But it's the Cardassian Border Wars. I know I call it the Border War, but everyone calls it the Border Wars. And it really is 3 separate conflicts. You've got the first one for the first 3 years, which is basically ground skirmishes. You've got the second one, which really lasts from 2350 right up until about 55. And then the final war, which is a very brief campaign, in 2360. So there's 3 of them, as well as skirmishes, all in between. And the Just War, and you kind of, the Cardassians are putting everything into it, and the Federation aren't, and it's like, okay, how much of it is because of Just War, and how much of it is because they just don't care, actually? But there is then the issue, that this war made things a lot worse for Bajor, and I'm surprised no one ever in Deep Space Nine, I swear, maybe a character did. You'll have someone say in the comments if someone did say, hang on, you made this occupation worse on us, why would we join you? Now, the other thing is, in the introduction of part of Battle of Minos Korva, we get introduced to our characters really properly in depth, and our hawks and our doves. So, obviously, most of the Starfleet characters are real canon characters, and I'm just kind of giving a backstory, again, based on dialogue, based on what is implied. Given that Nechayev was assigned later on to that region, it makes sense that she probably kind of that's where she made her name, and that's why she eventually got sent back. Again, same thing with Jellicoe, who is on command of Cairo at this point, and Maxwell, and all these people who are experience this firsthand, while most of the Federation just doesn't care. Then we've got the Cardassian characters, the majority of whom are my creations, so Legat Jazuk and Gul Prakor, Gul Nasat, and they're all very different in many ways. Talking about them, I'll get to talking about the Cardassian characters more in depth later on, because I think they're quite interesting, just in terms of their view and their perspective, because then they're not ignorant. But that really comes across in Starfleet Under Siege. The other big thing is the tech gap, and closing the tech gap. The Cardassians are catching up with the introduction of Ekor and Kulanor. So really, I'll do a whole ship chat about both of those, because I love them. I have really developed a soft spot for the Ekor. It might be because I just found it on the FASA Star Trek ship Tactical Combat Simulator, something like that. FASA STS website, you can find it. I found it there, and looked for the entries anywhere else on the internet. I could not find it. So it was like, okay, clearly this has just been made up by the website's creators. And I really, 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 really liked the design. I thought it was a good, primitive kind of pre-Galor. I know in the web now on Faster STS, they do list it as a 2380s design. I don't like that personally because, A, if you look on that page, there's tons of post-Dominion War designs anyway, and two, I don't think it fits. I think it looks very primitive. And I think even if you show it to just, I think if you just show it to even like the most casual of fan, you put it next to the Galor, it's like, which of these is more advanced? Which of these is the newer design? And they'll say the Galor because it is, and it is that sleekness compared to Ekor. But I wanted to have those ships, and I started off with the Natel, really to give it some variety. I didn't just want the Cardassian border war to just be Hidekis and Galors and Lakats fighting Federation ships. I thought that would be dreadfully boring, and I don't like just kind of reusing the same ship over and over again. It's okay when it's like one faction, like the Klingons, and they just make it their thing, but I think it's nice, and I think it does a good job of expanding the Cardassian aesthetic. And I mean, actually, you know, previously I thought Cardassian ships were quite insectoid-like or even beetle-like. But with the Ekor particularly, it's very aquatic. I mean, both of them are actually quite aquatic. So it had a little bit of variation in there. And, you know, I'm just kind of making it my mission, my goal to really just elevate the profile of the Ekor, particularly, you know, make it a well-known fanship in the community, because I think it deserves it. I think it's a lovely design. So, I mean, that really covers the first two parts of the Cardassian War, so the first two episodes. I'll probably split this up into at least two parts as a discussion video, so we'll have more next week, because I've been talking for 20 minutes and my voice is knackered, and I think this is a good breaking point, but we'll pick up on some of those themes next week. And again, continue to leave your thoughts in the comments below, and let me know what you think. Again, just in terms of, just because I say something doesn't, in these kind of videos, in these discussion videos, doesn't make it gospel. I'm when I'm talking in these videos, I am talking as another fan of my own content, which sounds somewhat vain, but it's the whole thing of like, I make content which I would watch, like that I would like to see. So when I'm talking about it in this kind of regard, I'm talking about it it's just my opinion. I'm just another opinion. You know, and you should feel free to have your own interpretations of the material and of the story yourselves. So with that being said, yeah, absolutely let me know what you think of these talking points, and I'll see you guys in the next video.